You know, the Daredevil show is praised for a lot of things: amazing writing, acting, cinematography, fight choreography, and of course being a great adaptation of Frank Miller's run on Daredevil comics. There's one character though that's absent from most of Miller's era, but is a major player in the show, and that is Karen Page. She's not a part of his main run, but she does play an important role in the Born Again storyline later on, but they don't adapt that until season 3. So the show writers had to adjust some things to make Karen fit into the story, and honestly, they did a pretty good job. To the point that, when making a surface level comparison of show Karen to her comic counterpart, most people would say the way they wrote her character was a very positive deviation from the source material. Clearly, all Karen had to do in the comics was, date Daredevil and be in danger because of Daredevil, or sell out Daredevil's secret identity in exchange for drugs, or die to save Daredevil. I'm starting to think her life revolves around the guy or something. So when they offered this new take on the character that was more independent and wasn't constantly getting fridged, no wonder people bought into the idea. Fridging, by the way, is a term coined by writer Gail Simone in 1999 to describe a literary trope which involves female characters facing disproportionate harm, such as death, maiming, assault, or really any sort of trauma to serve as plot devices to motivate male characters. Fridging happens in a lot of media, it's worth noting, but is especially bad for comic books because of their longevity and constant inflow of new characters, especially love interests. Daredevil comics are no exception, and they seem to always have a fresh supply of women who can get traumatized or killed to move the plot forward. We've got Elektra Natchez, Heather Glenn, Gloriana O'Brien, Mila Donovan, and, of course, Karen Page. I mean, this guy's fridge is stocked, it's a problem. Anyway, small tangent aside, this perception of Karen in the comics is not entirely accurate, and it erases some of her best stories, which just doesn't sit right with me. In fact, I would go so far as to say that Karen is one of the best adapted characters in the show when you take the right comics into consideration. To understand what I mean, let's go back to the beginning real quick. Daredevil's earlier comics were very much a product of their time, and that reflects very well on the storylines, style of writing, and of course the characters. Karen doesn't usually have much to do in those earlier issues other than being the damsel in distress who needs to be rescued by her charming knight in shining armor, Daredevil. It's what defines her character between her will they won't they romance with Matt, ongoing crush on Daredevil, and flirting with Matt's twin brother Mike, who was really just Matt in disguise. Her character changed and evolved over the years though, particularly after her return in Frank Miller's Born Again storyline. Starting in Anna Senti's run, she became more of a real character, with a personality that went beyond just being the love interest, and she's giving more room to shine as a result. Her relationship with Matt evolves into something more mature, and they start having real couple problems that aren't just the usual superhero drama. Not that it means she's in the clear. Like I mentioned before, Karen was constantly getting fridged in the comics, and stepping into the spotlight didn't really help with that. In fact, it likely made it worse. When she comes back, it's after her dream of being a Hollywood star spiraled into becoming an adult movie star, which set her on the path of severe drug addiction. That drug addiction leads her to lose everything that she had until she sells the only thing she has left, which is Daredevil's secret identity. She's chased down for having that information and decides the only way of surviving is begging for forgiveness and protection from Daredevil, the man who she had betrayed. But in order to get back, she has no option but to take a ride with another man who demands sexual favors as payment. Then, once that's all over and she's finally on a path of healing and putting her life back together along with Matt, she's cheated on and abandoned. Even if you can interpret that plot in a couple of different ways, it doesn't change the fact that she ended up suffering a lot from those events. And that's not even the end of it, because eventually, after she's forgiven him and they get back together again, she's framed for murder and goes to prison, which drives a wrench into their relationship after it had only just found its footing again. Then, finally, she decides to step away for good and moves back to LA, for a better job opportunity this time, and she's tricked into believing she's HIV positive as a result of her past. She returns to New York, devastated, only to be murdered when jumping in front of a billy club that wasn't even meant for her. All that to serve as a narrative device for the male character. So how do you adapt a character like that without falling into the fridging trap? Well, the Daredevil show writers found a pretty neat solution. Many of those events happened because of Daredevil in some way or another, right? So they moved them to before Karen even met him. For example, when she's framed for murder, it's not a direct attack on Matt Murdock, it's because she discovered a money laundering scheme in the company that she worked at, and they decided she needed to be out of the picture. Later on in Season 3, we learn more about her past, where they managed to fit her drug addiction as part of her backstory. That addiction, which in the comics leads to an event that causes her extreme guilt to the point of quitting and completely turning her life around, isn't because she sold out Daredevil's secret identity. Here, it's because it leads to the death of her little brother. These actions have consequences that directly impact and challenge her character. They are now shaping her story and setting the course for her own character arc, not Matt's. It allows for her personality to be more in line with Karen Page in the later runs, post-Nascenti. You know, the version of Karen who set up a legal clinic so Matt could give free advice to help those less fortunate in Hell's Kitchen. Because even though he'd been disbarred, she knew he could still help and pushed him to do so because it was the right thing to do. the one that would team up with Daredevil because she too shared his drive for justice and knew when and how to help, who became an important voice for defending vigilantes in the city. All things that show Karen was doing from the very start. These changes work so well because it allows her to play a larger role in the story while still giving her room to grow as the series goes on. In Season 1, after being framed for murder, Karen doesn't just move on. She could have. She signed an NDA and accepted some money in exchange for her silence, but she knows that's not right. So she reached out to Ben Urich, who had written the expose article on her former company, and the two joined forces to further investigate it. Her investigation leads to her finding Wilson Fisk's mother, and that encounter directly leads to her killing James Wesley, and indirectly leads to Fisk murdering Ben Urich. Both of these events would shape her decisions for the rest of the series. In Season 2, Ben's death allowed for her investigative role to grow, and she's the one to look more closely at Frank Castle's case and his story, uncovering a whole operation that seemingly wants to hide the truth about his family. The DA wants to keep that quiet to save her own skin, but Karen isn't only the one to uncover it, but also the one to push Matt and Foggy to fight back and stop that from happening. That's also what kicks off the Punisher's arc for the rest of Daredevil Season 2 and later his own spin-off. It's only after she tells him her theory that he's motivated to plead not guilty so his case can go to trial and they get a shot at exposing the lies. Season 3, she learns that Fisk was released from Rikers Island and immediately gets to work to put him back there. She discovers that Fisk was able to purchase the presidential hotel where he was being kept through an offshore firm called Red Lion National Bank that he'd been using to launder money. When that doesn't work and they still wouldn't throw him back behind bars, she decides to personally pay him a visit and confess to the murder of James Wesley, figuring it would trigger a violent response from him, giving the feds no excuse but to lock him back up. But still, the shadow of her most well-known storylines was still looming over her for 3 seasons, plus spin-offs. At this point though, they couldn't really fit that in very easily without dialing back on some of Karen's character development. They still found a way to keep those plot points, but this time have them play a different role in the story. In Season 3, Karen isn't a junkie who gives away Matt's secret, but when she visits Fisk in his penthouse, they were able to include a pretty clever reference to it. During their confrontation, she accidentally reveals to him that Matt is Daredevil. It didn't matter at this point, Fisk already knew, but Karen didn't know that and still thought she was the one responsible. That directly leads into her choosing to go to St. Clinton Church instead of leaving town. She chooses to stay in New York to warn Matt about what she thought she had done, which allowed Fisk to track her down and send Dex to kill her as revenge for killing Wesley. The whole scene echoes her death in the comics, only with a different outcome. They even make sure to frame a shot similar to the panel of Matt holding her dead body, only with the roles now reversed, just in case you missed the reference. But moving on, what about the new show? What does Karen have going for her in Daredevil Born Again? Well, last we see of her in Season 3, she's with Matt and Foggy as the trio looks ahead to the future in a new firm, now with her name on it as well. We don't know much about the time between the original show Season 3 and Daredevil Born Again Season 1, but we know that 7 years have passed since we last caught up with Nelson, Murdock, and Paige, and we can deduce that they have been doing pretty well for themselves. We know they represented Peter Parker after he was exposed as Spider-Man by Mysterio, and we know from She-Hulk that they try to mostly take on cases that'll actually make a difference and help people, but sometimes they need to take on a case for the money so they can keep the lights on. They've got their own storefront legal practice, which is definitely a step up from the back of a butcher shop like they joked about in the Season 3 finale. Karen, again, has her name on the firm now, which has some interesting implications. New York doesn't allow for non-lawyers to be partners in a law firm, so this could mean Karen went and got a law degree in the 7 years between both seasons. She'd be in a bit of a tight schedule, but it's definitely possible. After we catch up with them in the beginning of episode 1, Foggy is murdered and we skip another year ahead, at which point Karen had moved away from New York to San Francisco. I talked a little bit more in my last video about why Karen and Foggy weren't in Season 1, but the gist of it is, Marvel decided to bring them back way too late, and at that point, most of the show had already been filmed. So they had to keep that decision and use whatever was left to establish the new season, where the OG characters have larger roles. And that's what they did. From the interviews with the cast and crew, to the set photos, and even the trailer itself, it's clear that Karen is a big part of Daredevil Born Again Season 2. But what will that larger role be? Well, we can make some educated guesses based on what we know. We'll be looking at some set photos, by the way, so potential spoilers ahead. Season 1 ends with Mayor Fisk declaring martial law in all of New York, letting the anti-vigilante task force practically take over the city, hurting and arresting any citizens as they see fit. Daredevil and Karen Page decide to assemble an army of vigilantes to fight back. Now, I'm sure that army will be a lot less exciting than its comic counterpart, but it's fair to say they'll both lead whatever team they do have while they work on exposing the Fisks and their scheme in Red Hook. Earlier in that episode, Fisk blows up Matt Murdock's apartment while looking for him, and we know from the Season 2 trailer that earlier in the season Matt will be considered missing, meaning that he and Karen will have to work on their cover for some period of time. There are set photos that seem to confirm this. They feature Matt in the trademark MCU disguise of sunglasses and a hoodie, and Karen in a leather jacket, sunglasses, and a red wig. Many fans have already pointed out the similarity to Dakota North, a private investigator from the comics who briefly worked for Nelson and Murdoch. So maybe while they're hiding, Karen uses Dakota North as an alias to cover up their tracks. I mean, they seem to have their own space from the shots we got of them in the trailer, so this could be a use case for it. It's not like they can sign a lease using their own names without the mayor's kingpin senses going off. This is also supported by the fact that Dakota North, like I said, is a private investigator in the comics, and from the season 3 finale, we know that Karen took on that role for the firm, at least temporarily. In season 2, that's Born Again season 2 by the way, I'm sure that won't get confusing, she'll likely be stepping into that role again, snooping for proof of the Fist's many crimes, such as their money laundering scheme in Red Hook, and the many people they've been keeping in captivity in those cages, which holy shit seems to be only increasing in numbers. They've got their own prison complex going. You would lock them out of ever bringing Dakota into the show, yeah, but that might be a sacrifice they're willing to make. Of course, we also have Jessica Jones in season 2, who's known for being a private investigator, and while I think she'll have a role to play with that too, I believe her story will be more heavily tied with the anti-vigilante task force, due to being considered a vigilante herself and the fact that those guys are all about going after, you guessed it, vigilantes. Anyway, speaking of missing people, you may know from my last video that I'm a firm believer on the Foggy is alive theory. You can go and watch the full video for a better explanation, but basically, Vanessa faked Foggy's death and is hiding him away somewhere. Now, what does that have to do with Karen? Well, remember when I said she moved to San Francisco? Yeah, that's actually such a weird choice. In the comics, she does move away. I mentioned it earlier, but it's while she's away that she gets hooked on drugs and we get that whole backstory that started the Born Again arc in the comics. But she famously moves to Los Angeles, not San Francisco. You know who does move to San Francisco though? Foggy. And Matt. Matt actually moved there twice, the first with Black Widow back in the day, and the second with Kirsten McDuffie and Foggy after they faked his death. That was the second time they faked his death, by the way, if you're keeping count. After New York, San Francisco is the most important city to Daredevil comics. It's the only other one he lives in for a prolonged period of time. And he did it twice. However, neither time was in any way connected to Karen. They could just say she moved to LA, only for a different reason. I wouldn't think anything of it. I don't think anyone would. But San Francisco feels like a deliberate choice. There's a theory that Karen knows that Foggy is alive and that's why she is in San Francisco to begin with, but that's not what I'm getting at here. I don't think that's true at all. Unless we get some major revelations in season 2, I can't think of a reason why she would know about it and choose not to tell Matt. What I think could be interesting though is if she started investigating Foggy's death and that eventually leads her to San Francisco. Think about it, maybe Vanessa is keeping him there, a safe distance away from New York, and Karen digs around deep enough that it somehow leads to her being close to figuring that out. She doesn't even have to think Foggy is alive, maybe her investigation is into something else, like how Poindexter got out of prison to begin with. Then, by putting just a few more pieces together, pieces that she gets from investigating the Fisks and especially Vanessa in season 2, she's able to figure out that Foggy is alive and where they're keeping him. Something else that's practically confirmed is Karen and Matt's romance making a comeback. This has been a long time coming, and their getting together has been slowly built up ever since season 1. It's unclear why that didn't happen during those 7 years we skipped, but I guess their friend Scode was working overtime to make sure they wouldn't get back together off screen. In season 2, they'll be sharing a bunch of screen time as vigilantes of course, but also in their apartment, hideout, hole in the wall, whatever this place is, they seem to be living together and we'll likely see them together a lot. And all that proximity will result in them finally confronting their feelings for each other. Something that apparently they've been avoiding for almost a decade. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out, especially now that Karen knows that Matt is Daredevil and there aren't any secrets between them anymore. Their post-Born Again dynamic is my favorite from the comics, and I'd love to see that adapted into the show. And it seems like that might be the case by the end of the season, as there are some set photos showing them walking together in a shot that could resemble the last panel in issue 233, which is the one that wraps up the Born Again storyline. That panel signified a fresh start for both of them after the traumatic events of their recent past. Finally, they had overcome all the obstacles, found each other, and were working towards a better future together. In the show, it could mean a similar thing. Obviously with different events, they've already adapted the actual Born Again storyline in season 3, but it could mean a fresh new start for their relationship. It would be a nice way to reference the comic that inspired the title of the show and finally solidify their relationship moving forward. They're even walking towards the restaurant from their first date in season 2, which could be symbolic of a new beginning for them, one where they actually know and love each other for exactly who they are. Still about Karen and Matt, there are a couple more relatively inconsequential things I think will be interesting to see. One of the most relevant comics to their relationship is Daredevil Yellow by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. It's a retelling of Daredevil's origin story in early days, narrated by Matt as he writes a series of letters to Karen. He does it as a way to cope with her death. It's very sad, but it's a great comic. I do recommend it if you want to get into these books. Anyway, I bring it up because it retcons a couple of things that I think completely recontextualizes Karen's relationship with Daredevil. For one thing, Karen is the one to give him the Man Without Fear moniker, something he doesn't have in the show yet. They allude to it in both the original and the new show, but we're yet to see someone straight up call him the Man Without Fear, and it would be a really nice nod if Karen is the one to do it. Similarly, Karen is the inspiration behind the red suit. Up until this point in the comic, Daredevil had been using his yellow suit, obviously. But at the end, Karen asks him why not red if he's going for the devil theme, and even tells him it's her favorite color. Soon after, Daredevil shows up in his iconic red suit that he still wears to this day. Of course, he's already had his red suit in the show for a long time, but we can all agree there's something notably missing from it. We all know the black suit will have the double Ds. And we know from the set photos that the people of New York have been using a slightly altered version of those as a form of resistance. I think it would be a nice touch if Karen is the one who gives him the idea of having a symbol, which becomes an important part of the fight against Fisk's regime. Besides, for Season 2, Daredevil does have a different colored suit, but the black is clearly painted on his original red one, and we know that paint will be chipping away as the season goes on. So maybe Karen is also the one to suggest he goes back to red for Season 3, only this time with the iconic double Ds. These are small things that could add a lot to their dynamic this season and give us a better look into how it changed since we last saw them in the original Season 3. Besides, the show writers have done a pretty good job at keeping Karen's relationship with Daredevil fairly comic accurate. From having a crush on him, to learning who he really is, to working together. Most importantly, in both comics and the show, Karen is the first person Matt ever willingly tells he's Daredevil. That's significant. It shows a degree of trust, and it shows that deep down he wants to keep her in his life, even if he acts like an idiot about it sometimes. So I think it would be cool if not only they kept that going, but also expanded on it, with Karen being the inspiration behind the hopefully iconic Daredevil look in the near future. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. And if this is your second time here, thank you so much for the support in the last video. It actually did a lot better than I thought it would, and it's a little wild to me that so many people took almost 20 minutes of their day to listen to me ramble about Foggy Nelson, and now again about Karen Paige. I'll keep these videos coming. I love Daredevil and all the characters surrounding Daredevil, so if you're also into that, I promise there's a lot more on the way. A little spoiler, the next video will be about Born Again Season 2, only not about a specific character. It'll be about the plot of the show in general, and where I think the story is going. The show is relevant right now, so that's why I keep talking about it, and probably will talk about it some more when the episodes are coming out, but it's not the only thing I want to do here. I want to talk about the comics too. Old comics, new comics. There's a new run that's starting in April by Stephanie Phillips and Lee Garbett. Really excited for that. We'll definitely be talking about it. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any future Daredevil ramblings. And if there's something specific you'd like me to ramble about, let me know. I'm always open to new ideas. Anyway, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!